Welcome to the realm of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy listening. Colonel Stephen Montgomery climbed into the military helicopter, his movements precise and practiced, the interior hummed with activity, soldiers checking their equipment, the pilot running through final diagnostics. Stephen surveyed the scene, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. As one of the most experienced officers in the military, he carried the weight of leadership on his shoulders. His record was flawless. Missions completed, soldiers brought home, objectives met. But today, something felt different. The weather was turbulent, the kind of storm that seemed to swallow the horizon. Clouds churned angrily in the distance, and the wind howled against the helicopter's rotors. Stephen had voiced his concerns to the pilot, who had assured him that the aircraft was in prime condition. Still, unease coiled in his gut. He gave the final order to lift off, his voice calm, but his thoughts uneasy. The helicopter rose, cutting through the stormy skies with difficulty. Within minutes, the turbulence grew worse. It wasn't just bumps, it was violent, stomach-lurching shakes that rattled every bolt in the aircraft. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the control panels. The pilot's voice cracked over the radio, calling for an emergency descent, but the situation spiraled out of control too quickly. Stephen's soldiers moved with trained efficiency, strapping on parachutes and preparing to jump. Stephen shouted orders, directing them to abandon the failing aircraft. One by one, they leapt into the storm, disappearing into the swirling chaos below. When only he and the pilot remained, Stephen hesitated. He looked at the young man struggling with the controls, his face pale, but determined. For a moment, Stephen thought about staying, about going down with the aircraft to support the pilot in his final moments. But the pilot looked at him, his eyes pleading. "Go, sir," the pilot said, his voice trembling but firm. "There's nothing you can do here." Stephen clenched his jaw, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. He saluted the man, a gesture of respect and regret, and then jumped. The storm enveloped him as he fell, the parachute jerking open with a snap. Wind buffeted him from every direction, and he struggled to control his descent. Below, he caught a glimpse of the helicopter's fiery end as it collided with the mountainside, a burst of light and smoke against the dark landscape. When Stephen's feet finally hit solid ground, he crumpled to his knees. He was on a small island, surrounded by dense jungle and rocky cliffs. The storm still raged overhead, rain pelting him as he struggled to catch his breath. He sat there for what felt like hours, his mind replaying the events over and over. Guilt gnawed at him. He had lost men before, but this was different. He had made the call to take off in dangerous conditions. He had trusted the pilot's assurances. Now, the weight of those decisions crushed him. As he sat there, consumed by his thoughts, a voice broke through the sound of the storm. "Hey, you there! What are you doing here?" Stephen's head snapped up. He saw a figure emerging from the jungle, a woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen. Her skin was a luminous shade of violet, shimmering faintly even in the dim light. Her eyes were large and expressive, filled with curiosity and a hint of caution. She moved gracefully, her presence otherworldly, yet oddly comforting. Stephen blinked, wondering if he was hallucinating. He didn't respond, lowering his gaze instead. The woman approached him cautiously, her voice softer this time. "Are you hurt? You look lost?" Stephen remained silent for a moment before finally muttering, "I don't want to talk." The woman tilted her head, studying him. "I heard the explosion. Were you in that helicopter?" Reluctantly, Stephen nodded. The words spilled out of him before he could stop them, a brief, fragmented account of what had happened. The woman listened intently, her expression somber. "You must be thirsty," she said after a moment. She produced a small container, its surface glinting with an unfamiliar metallic sheen. "It's water, but it's very cold. It might not be like what you're used to." Stephen reached for it, but when he took a sip, the liquid was icy to the point of pain. He winced, handing it back. The woman frowned, then offered a solution. "If it's too cold, I can warm it for you in my mouth." Stephen stared at her, taken aback by the suggestion. but desperation outweighed his hesitation. He nodded, and she took a small sip, holding it briefly in her mouth before tilting her head to let it drip gently into his. The water was bearable now, and he drank gratefully, the act strangely intimate yet practical. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. The woman smiled faintly. "My name is Lexi," she said. "I've been stranded here for a while. I was a soldier too, once. From Astra Colony." Stephen raised an eyebrow, curiosity breaking through his exhaustion. "Astra Colony?" Lexi nodded. "A world far from here. My unit was on a mission, but something went wrong. I lost them all." Her voice faltered, and she looked away. "I've been here ever since. Waiting, surviving, hoping." Her story struck a chord with Stephen. Though their worlds were different, their experiences of loss and isolation were the same. For the first time since his crash, he felt a flicker of connection, a thread that tied him to something beyond his guilt. Over the following days, Stephen and Lexi worked together to survive. She showed him the island's resources, edible plants, hidden water sources, natural shelters. He contributed his military training, helping to fortify their camp and plan for long-term survival. At night, they sat by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts. Lexi spoke of Astra's glittering cities and her years as a soldier, her voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. Stephen shared tales of his missions, his tone measured but heavy with unspoken regret. As time passed, their bond deepened. Lexi's light-hearted humor began to chip away at Stephen's stoicism. While Stephen's steady presence gave Lexi a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. They learned to read each other's moods without words, finding comfort in their shared silence. One night, as they sat under the stars, Stephen found himself watching Lexi more closely. The way the firelight danced on her violet skin, the way her laughter seemed to soften the edges of the world, it was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of her silvery hair away from her face. Lexi looked at him, her eyes searching his. In that moment, the weight of their shared struggles and the connection they had built came crashing down on him. Stephen leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. Lexi froze for a moment, then melted into the kiss, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. When they pulled apart, there was no need for words. The kiss had said everything. For a few heartbeats, they simply looked at each other, the crackling firelight casting flickering shadows across their faces. Stephen could see the faint shimmer of unshed tears in Lexi's vibrant, otherworldly eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They carried something far more profound. Relief, joy, and perhaps the same overwhelming gratitude he felt in his chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, neither of them was alone. Lexi broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think I could feel this way again. Not here. Not after everything." Her gaze dropped, almost as if she were afraid of what she had just admitted. Stephen reached for her hand, his calloused fingers brushing against her smooth, cool skin. "Me neither," he said softly. "But being here with you, it's changed everything. You've changed everything." She let out a soft laugh, a sound that felt like music in the stillness of the night. "For a soldier, you're surprisingly poetic." Stephen smirked, shaking his head. "Don't let it fool you. It's probably just the concussion talking." They both laughed then, a sound that echoed through the quiet forest, and for the first time since either of them had arrived on the island, the oppressive weight of their circumstances lifted just a little. The days that followed seemed lighter, as though the air itself had softened around them. They worked side by side, building a more permanent shelter and gathering food. But there was a new rhythm to their movements, a harmony born of understanding and connection. Lexi's alien ingenuity, combined with Stephen's military training, allowed them to create systems for survival that neither could have managed alone. She devised a way to filter water using minerals she recognized from her home planet, while Stephen built a sturdy perimeter to protect their camp from nocturnal predators. They were a team now, not just surviving, but truly living. But it wasn't just their practical collaboration that deepened their bond. It was the quiet moments, the ones where words weren't necessary. At night, They sat by the fire, leaning against each other as they watched the stars. Lexi would tell him about her home, painting vivid pictures of Astra's twin moons and crystalline cities. Her voice would grow wistful, her words tinged with both pride and sorrow. Stephen listened intently, fascinated by her stories and the way her face lit up when she described her world. In return, Stephen spoke of Earth, not the Earth of war and destruction, but the simple beauty of a sunrise over the mountains, the stillness of a forest after fresh snowfall, the laughter of his comrades during moments of peace. One evening, as they lay under the open sky, Lexi turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think anyone's looking for us?" Stephen hesitated. "Maybe, but I can't say I'm in a hurry to be found." Her eyes searched his face, and she smiled softly. "Me neither." Time passed, though neither of them kept track of the days. Seasons seemed to blur, marked only by the subtle changes in the island's flora and fauna. Their makeshift home grew more elaborate, adorned with small comforts they had scavenged or crafted together. The connection between them deepened in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. Stephen found himself marveling at how effortlessly Lexi moved between humor and wisdom, how she could make him laugh even in the darkest moments. Lexi, in turn, admired Stephen's quiet strength and his unwavering determination to protect her, even when she insisted she could take care of herself. One day, as they stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, Stephen turned to her, his expression serious. "Lexi, if we ever get off this island—" She interrupted him, placing a finger gently against his lips. "Don't," she said, "don't talk about leaving." "Not yet." He nodded, understanding her unspoken fears. This island, despite its isolation, had become their sanctuary, a place where they had found each other and built something neither had dared to hope for. That night, as they lay tangled together in their small shelter, Lexi traced patterns on his chest with her fingers. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think love was a weakness, something that got in the way of duty. But now," she paused, her voice catching, "now, I think it's the only thing that's kept me alive." Stephen pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You've kept me alive, Lexi. In more ways than one." The days continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and triumphs. But no matter what the island threw at them, they faced it together. Their love, forged in the crucible of survival, was unshakable. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. As long as they had each other, they could face anything.